Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps that are integral to growth for early-stage beauty founders and brands. Today's episode includes a fantastic talk about sustainability and common challenges that brands face, like rebranding. And I'm joined by David Simnick of Soapbox. Now, David is the CEO of an organization that owns and operates 4 brands, but today we're going to focus on his work with Soapbox, which is a mission-driven, clean ingredient, trending beauty brand. And one really cool fact that I found about Soapbox is that for every product that they sell, they donate a bar of soap. I love how they've built their mission into their business. They pay local soap makers to make their own soap, and they also sponsor local recycling efforts and seed grants to keep this part of their business sustainable. To date, they've donated 34 million bars of soap and counting. Here's a little bit from our conversation so you get a flavor for the kind of guy that David is.
All right, the mission is the cherry on top. But the reason why we started this is the world doesn't need another shampoo company. The world doesn't need another body wash. What the world needs is brands that put people over profit, that help build conduits to make the world a better place, but also simultaneously make an amazing product that is free from parabens and phthalates and silicones and EDTA.
I just can't wait for you to hear our conversation on sustainability and moving through challenges with grit. Let's jump into the conversation. Enjoy the show. I have so many things that I'm thinking about since you've kind of dove into this. I'm curious, how does one get to a company like a Soapbox? Do you start with the mission in mind, or do you start with the product first and then you reverse engineer to kind of get to the mission? Is it a little bit of both? I mean, sustainability is something that is very important to so many retailers. It's important to so many consumers, right? Especially younger consumers, we're millennials over here, but we know it's even more important to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. But how do you build that into a business, or how did you work that into Soapbox? Because it seems like it is working out really well for you guys.
I would say that there's multiple ways in which you can start a brand. And there is no quote unquote right one, because I've seen multiple different reasons for create really successful brands. I've also seen the best reasons to be and the best reasons to launch a brand fail. And I think a lot of it comes down to there's luck involved. There's a lot of timing involved. There's hitting a sustainable trend. And we can get into, what's the difference between a trend that goes up and goes down, something like chia seeds versus, a couple of years it's really hot and then no one cares anymore. There's so many different directions we can take all this, but to concisely answer your question, the best way to probably achieve that is to talk about how we came about. And that is, I used to be a subcontractor for the United States Agency for International Development. I wanted to change the way that we were doing a lot of our hygiene work. This was back in 2010. We had no experience in consumer, and I think that was a huge downfall. We actually wanted Soapbox to be a not-for-profit. One of our friends who was in law school told us that we would get audited every year because we talk like a company, we sell like a company, and we would basically run our books like a company, yet we'd be a non-for-profit. So he's like, why don't you just be a better company? And that really kind of made us all step back for a second. We're like, all right, well, cool. And then when B Corp came around, we were one of the first B Corps, and we've always, gone through that arduous reauthorization process with B Corp, but it's totally worth it because it means someone else came and kicked our tires and audited our books and can say, yeah, they are doing what they say they're doing in terms of one for one, as well as how we treat the environment and how we treat our stakeholders, our employees, the community, and so on and so forth. But I think really we started first and foremost because we wanted to solve the mission. We wanted to solve the problem. And then we found out over the years, much through almost life killing in terms of the business, not our personal lives. Although some might say differently, jokingly, we found out how to run a consumer company. So I think we would have been far more successful had we known what we were doing in brand building, had we known what we were doing in operations, had we known what we were doing in marketing, instead of this 22-year-old hubris that usually comes with you believing that you power your way through it.
I don't see you as having hubris at all.
Girl, what? Come on. First off, I appreciate the sarcasm.
I think you have to have a little bit of that if you're an entrepreneur, because the things that you're typically doing are so, you're either doing things that other people are doing and you're saying, I want to do it better, or you're doing something brand new that someone hasn't really done before. So I think you have to have some confidence and a little bit of resiliency for sure, right? Which I think kind of comes with hubris, to be honest, to be able to stick through it. But in that, you talked about, not necessarily knowing operations, not necessarily knowing how to build a brand. Can you talk about what was possibly your biggest learning, or what would you say of all of those things were most important as you stumbled through the learning blocks of building this brand?
Well, first I would say you're absolutely right. Having done this for now, a decade plus, I've seen a lot of companies come and go. The biggest unifying theme that I see with entrepreneurs who make it is that they have an extra helping of grit. Like, they can figuratively take a punch again and again and again. And, there's a lot of ways in which entrepreneurs get through the hard times. For me, there's this really weird thing that happens. I'd say right after this podcast recording, I get, and, knock on wood, I'm not a superstitious person, but I just don't want this to happen. It's a Friday. I do not want to deal with this. So, but let's say I get an awful email, right? Something terrible has happened. Either, I don't even want to run through all the scenarios, but something awful happens. And usually what happens with me is I go through all the stages of grief within about an hour, and maybe two. And then there's this little voice in the back of my head that's just like, remember why you're doing this. Pick yourself up. There's a way forward. I need that hour, maybe two. I just need that time to really absorb that big of a blow. But then we're back at it. And it's like, look, this mission is greater than myself. It's greater than our team. And it's worth fighting for. And, it's too bad you had a bad day. The people we have the privilege to serve probably have it worse some days. So, pick yourself up. And I've seen really successful entrepreneurs refuse to give up. They pivot. I think that there's also something to be said for there is a time and a place where the concept's not working, product market fit's not there, and it's the best and wisest move as a good steward of capital to move on. And that's completely fine too. But I think oftentimes what I've seen is that entrepreneurs throw in the towel way before it's time to actually do so. And had they stuck with it, there could have been a different outcome. Our story, we started making soap in my college kitchen in 2010. I went off and did Teach for America. And then, in 2012, we got into one Whole Foods and then went to a whole region. And Monique, when I say we launched the worst possible branding that you could ever imagine in the history of personal care, we put children's faces, the whole face. It was only pictures. The thing is that our listeners can't actually see your face right now, which I wish.
I would choose differently. I'm looking a little dumbfounded, but why?
But why indeed? We thought it was visionary. We thought people would look at this and just be like, why are there kids smiling, looking back at me on a bar of soap? So the whole idea was on V1 of our packaging was this is going to be really disruptive and the rest of the market isn't doing this. So therefore, let's launch with this. And it failed abysmally. And the only way that it would sell is if someone was there demoing. But you can't demo in every single store you sell in across America. You can't do that. So then we changed, and it got a little better. And then we changed the packaging again, and it actually got a little worse. And then we changed the packaging again. And that's when, this beautiful thing launched in both. Have you never seen this before?
I'm looking for the listeners. I'm looking at another prior version of Soapbox packaging that is different than what it looks like today.
You're being kind. This looks like automotive cleaner. You're selling shampoo that basically looks like it. I'll get the tough.
It kind of reminds me of Valvoline, the oil bottles that they use when I'm getting my oil changed. It kind of reminds me of that, but this is a personal care product.
Yes. So this is what not to do we're just going to change today's episode and how to lose a lot of money at Soapbox. We launched this. We thought it was a really good idea. It was not a good idea for various reasons, and it didn't sell. And I think the other thing is, so Richelieu from Sundial, most people know Sundial by Shea Moisture, which was their biggest brand, took us under his wing at a NACDS once. And he said, I think you guys are more focused on selling to customers and not the consumer. And the most important thing that you need to focus on is the consumer and not the customer. Monique finds the clip editing tool and says, that's the quote. That's it. You're going to have something.
That's it right there. You saw, I was like, oh, that's a good snippet. I'm going to write this timestamp down so I can tell my editor, we want that, Chris. Run that back in the intro. That's good.
Too bad there's no tape. You know, like, can't really actually run the tape back. He just with his cursor is like, all right, we're at minute 26. Cool, got it. Anyways, so Richard takes us under his wing, says that, really has a profound impact on me and Dan, my co-founder. And we had it all wrong. We kept on thinking that getting on the shelves of Target and Walmart and CVS and Walgreens and Wegmans was the most important thing. It's not. It's getting on the shelf, which is actually easier than I think most people think, and then selling through and beating out national competitors in velocity and penny profit and margin and being accretive to the category and having higher loyalty and all these things that we're incredibly excited to tout. But that's how you build a brand. Mm-hmm. Like, the consumer is the most important piece of the whole equation.
And just to be clear, right, in case those that are listening are like, the customer in your case is the retailer.
You got it.
Right? That's who you're calling the customer, because as a brand, you are selling into the retailer. They are your customer. But the interesting thing that I love about retail is that you really have two consumers when you're on the branded side, right? Your consumer is the person who's actually using your product, but your other consumer, which we call our customer, is the retailer. But you still got to make sure that they like you. But you also, it sounds like you figured out you really need to appeal to the consumer. And if you appeal to the consumer, the person who's buying the product, who's using the product, then that customer, AKA the retailer, will like you that much more. Right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So it's like there's a two-step process. You got to get on the shelf. And then the moment you get on the shelf, you have to fly off the shelf, which sounds paradoxical, but it makes sense in a sense that there's so many competitors in almost every category of CPG. How are you adding value to that particular merchant? And I think the other thing that's really interesting is when, like, for those of you who are just starting out in CPG and you're thinking about brick and mortar, you have to put your mind in the merchant's head, right? Let's just use liquid hand soap because a lot of people know all the different brands within the space, or most of them. Your number one seller is probably going to be your private label, right? So if you're Walmart and you're the Walmart buyer for liquid hand soap, you're like, well, if I'm just using one metric, which is what is the brand that sells the most, I'm just going to have a whole 4-feet set of just Equate liquid hand soap. Well, that's not, your sales as an overall category will plummet. And the reason being is not everyone who walks into your store wants to buy Equate. So then you got to think about, all right, well, what is the proper mix within this shelf that gets me the most amount of sales, that captures the most amount of consumers? And then you need to think about brands that are actually going to bring people into your category. So there's some people who walk into Walmart who never want to shop liquid hand soap. But if there's this super cool brand that's blowing up on TikTok that's going to make someone walk into that category, now all of a sudden you have a brand new consumer. So the other thing is, let's say that you offer, you are double the price as Equate, or maybe you're triple the price. So your velocity is moving maybe 1 unit per store per week, and Equate's moving 3. Well, on a per penny profit basis, you actually might be delivering more than what Equate is. So even though you are moving slower in terms of velocity, in terms of the actual money that they're making off your brand, your slower moving brand is actually making that category, that merchant's P&L, you're actually making it better. So there's so many different ways that you can slice and dice what a merchant is thinking, what she, he, they, their strategy is, And that is just the name of the game. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs come in thinking that their brand is the bee's knees. Can't believe I just said that, but I also was looking at some Bushwick Kitchen, which is another one of our brands. So apologize to the 1950s saying, hear me out, one of our brands. But I'm not that funny. I'm just laughing to try to cover up my own insecurities.
This is a great conversation, David. It's going really well. I'm liking it.
Oh, okay, thank you. You know what? I appreciate how you just came in. Don't edit that out. Like, let's keep that in. You were just hyped from the sidelines. I really appreciate it. But it's super interesting because, like, a lot of entrepreneurs think that, my brand needs to exist and Target needs to carry it. It's like, well, everyone and their mother wants to be on the same shelf, so why? Right? Like, what are you offering to that merchant that they don't already have? And what is it that's going to help them achieve their objectives? But then once you get in, like, that's half the battle, which, if you haven't found my major headline to your listeners, it's actually the less important battle. Like, the more important battle is like, what is your relationship with the end consumer? How are you getting, so the moment you hit that shelf, you have a super fast start and then you're just off to the races with that particular retailer. So if there is like, look, that's sales 101 in terms of brick and mortar CPG. And I think you'd be amazed. And we didn't know that. Like, it took us years to really get that mindset and to understand. Another great piece of advice to any CPG entrepreneur out there is the next sales call you have, if you have the time, and this is the hardest part, is finding that time. Listen, that buyer will, if you know the right type of questions to ask, come prepared. Right. So you don't walk in there and just be like, oh, hi, store Y. What's your customer? Right. Like, walk their sets, understand their viewpoint, try to figure out exactly what their differentiation in the market is, understand, the pitch to that merchant about why your brand fits their overall strategy. But then this is where you can get super creative about what is it about your particular brand and whatever, the economic headwinds or however the time, and like, are you trading up a consumer? Are you bringing in a new consumer? Are you helping them achieve their objective in terms of maybe they haven't caught a certain natural trend yet? Maybe they over index in this, so they feel fine, but maybe you could actually bring up another index that they don't have enough of. So there's all these ways that, like, this is the work, it's the preparation. And then when you get there, it's this beautiful interplay of where you're able to build, and this is actually one of my favorite parts of the job, you get to build really meaningful relationships with buyers because you all have the same common goal, right? Sell more things. And thankfully, with our brand, the more that we sell, the more we give. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So good. Oh, man, I'm like so excited for folks to hear this because you are sharing some real gems here. So I'm wondering, we can back up a little bit. So when you launched with, kids on a bottle. That didn't work. Then you launched and you said, okay, we're going to change it from kids on a bottle. We're going to make it look like, you're getting your oil change from Valvoline. And that didn't work. And your packaging is beautiful now, by the way.
Thank you.
But I'm wondering, in that stair step of this isn't working, you still were able to build relationships with retailers and get on shelves. How did you determine which parts of the brand needed to be updated? Like, how did you figure out, it's the packaging, we still haven't figured that out, versus, maybe it's the marketing and how we're talking to the consumer? Or was it both? Was it, we're in the wrong retailer? Like, what pieces of the equation did you all realize this isn't working for us, and so we're going to change this? Was there anything else in addition to the packaging?
Oh, what's funny, we knew the writing on the wall. You usually know the writing on the wall when you launch with a brick and mortar retailer by like week 6. Depending on like the retailer, you might need to wait till like week 8. And what is their store execution and how many stores? Then there's some nuances in terms of like what channel and so on and so forth. But about 6 to 8 weeks, you know your baseline. And we were dead in the water. We were dead last. Like, not even like, hey, it's like we were kind of fighting. It was like, we were picked dead last for the dodgeball team. Like, they were just like, oh, no, we're done taking people for the team. And then somehow we made the cut. Like, that's where we netted out on Nielsen and IRI. And this is bad. Kudos to us. we could sell like crazy and people believed in us and our mission and our product. The branding just didn't convey the thoughtfulness of the choices we made about how good the formula was. So we hired Anthem in New York as a branding agency. We spent every last penny we had. I had to go and convince a bunch of our investors to believe in us, which was not easy. And that might be one of the hardest things I've ever done in like 2016, 2017. 2017 was the hardest year of my life because we had to reduce our team by half. I had to tell my team that it wasn't their fault, that it was mine. That, the decisions we made just weren't putting numbers on the board. And, they worked hard, but yet the overall strategy and vision was not clicking with consumers. So, but working with Anthem, we took nothing that we believe is sacred and nothing that we assume shall not be tested. So every single assumption, every single decision point in creating the brand was rigorously tested with focus groups, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And we just invested so heavily in getting it right. Focus groups. And I think the reason why Soapbox does so well is it looks like a Mercedes, but you can buy it at a Honda price. It looks like it should be double, triple, maybe even quadruple what it is. And the other huge insight that I've gotten, not only from our journeys through the marketplace, but then also from Bombus, and I've heard this from Warby, and I've heard this from Bold Branch and all these other mission-driven companies. People care about the mission, but they're not there to buy the mission at the moment that they're at the shelf. She wants to get a phenomenal deep conditioner. She wants to get the most buttery butters, like for herself. And that's what she wants. So you got to hit on all the reasons to believe to sell that, because you are this unknown thing in a mysterious looking package. And now you got to convince her in a very short amount of time frame, because she's there to shop. She's there to get in and out. Depending on the category, she may have already made up her mind before she even actually walked in the store. But thankfully, in the categories that Soapbox competes in, you have a really good chance to switch her when she's right there. So we have a tried and true playbook over the past 5 years that we've really seen, doubling year over year growth that we deploy with each one of our retail partners and continue to modify as we grow with them, that we have been able to introduce the product, build a strong loyalty within the brand, and then be able to replicate that as we grow in distribution. But coming back to your initial question, we started from scratch. We said you can change everything but the name. You can change the logo. You can change the bottle. You can change everything. You can't change the formula. Basically, throw the whole bathwater out. The only baby that we're keeping is the fact that we're called Soapbox, and keep the mission. But it was a really interesting experiment in terms of, does packaging matter? And it doesn't take a rocket scientist and CPG to tell you the answer, but we are definitively a case study of yes. Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. And as a former buyer myself, I can say absolutely it does. And I mean, there's numerous examples of new category entrants coming and changing things up with bottle shapes, right? Packaging shapes, because to your point, right? When that consumer is at the shelf, they are typically on autopilot. I think it's something like 95% of the decisions that we make are on autopilot. And so you need something that's going to say, this is different, that's going to stop you from that autopilot, that's going to cause you to look differently, to kind of turn your head, if you will. And so packaging can very much do that. And the packaging that maybe was going to do that in 2000 is not the packaging that's going to do it in 2023, right? It continues to change, and you kind of have to be willing to know that that's going to consistently be different.
I completely agree.
Did you find that there was anything negative that happened with the rebranding? It sounds like it definitely helped you to learn a lot, and that you have a lot of pros, and that ultimately it worked well, but what are the cons?
We had sold a couple million units prior to that. And we received just one email from a lady who was like, I really appreciated your retro looking packaging. It was so different from the rest of the products on the shelf. Just one. We only heard one lady. And I sent her this email that I was just like, we're sorry. that like we changed something that you really loved for like everyone's benefit. It had to happen.
You're like, you were the only one who liked this retro packaging.
I don't want to like set her aflame. I wanted to gently be like, but I did offer her. I was like, if you want a truckload of this stuff, because it's got to go. I was like, if you want to be a one woman TJ Maxx, like we will sell this at a discount to you. But no, that was only one email. And we joke about it. Like there was only one person who was just like, wow, we're really sad to see the Vaseline animal oil go.
So, David, I'm curious. There's so many brands that are out here these days. I feel like there's new indie brands that are popping up every day. And the big thing that I ask consistently on this show is, what advice would you give to these new brands that are coming up? I mean, in some cases, I feel like packaging has improved significantly. So I don't know if that's necessarily it, but if there is a new brand that maybe isn't necessarily hitting benchmarks, what advice would you give them, or what advice would you give brands that are launching today, because it is so much more crowded and I think it's a lot harder to cut through?
I completely agree with that statement. I mean, one just needs to walk the halls of Expo West to then see like the crushing amount of competition in every category. My biggest piece of advice is, I think agile development and lean startup, those are great. They're fantastic models of thought to build a startup, but they're not the right books or theories of thought to build a CPG company. And the reason being is, like, if you run like a software as a service company or you run a consumer tech company, you can, if you have the developing chops on your team, to change your product overnight. You could pivot, right? You can real-time A/B test, and then 24 hours later, you take the results of that B test or A/B test and you say, okay, we're going to flip it to this. You can't do that if you're on the shelves of Walgreens or CVS or Kroger or Wegmans or wherever. You can't do that. Like, you got to wait a whole year to then pay a ton of money to get out of whatever you designed, in terms of if you're switching a bottle enough to require a UPC change or doing a flowing changeover. But then you also need to have successful sell-through of whatever you launched in order to get out of what you want to change into, or to get out of what you launched into what you want to change into. Like, it's a different type of discipleship in terms of entrepreneurship that I think needs to be given to CPG entrepreneurs. And that is going back to the days of like waterfall development, which a lot of people in like today's entrepreneurship communities go like, ick, no, I don't want to go back to like, think and prepare and ship fast and like make mistakes and break things and like, cool. But that might kill you if you're a startup. Like, if you launch in 2,000 Walmart doors and it's just sitting on a shelf, like, you are paying for that to come back. And that is going to probably kill your startup. So the biggest piece of advice I would say is, there are really effective ways to start small as a CPG entrepreneur, test your assumptions, get all the P's in our, like product, packaging, price point, placement, promotion. Every time I ever have one of these conversations, I come up with like a new P. So like, it was 4, now it's 5. Sometimes it tops out at 8 if I'm really creative that morning and I had enough coffee. So the point is like, there's so many things that you can test. One of the things that I've seen really interesting over the past 5 years is that there's been this growth of brands that start on Amazon that built, like Liquid IV is a great example of, that team had phenomenal results on Amazon, actually launched into some retail partners, failed out. And then they went back in a couple of years later after the brand then was so demonstrably like everywhere on Amazon. And they were doing, like, I think $50,000 days on Amazon, to where then it's just like, okay, now you have enough consumers where if you put it into these more traditional brick and mortar retailers with potentially an older customer, it's gotten there. So there's the right way to test. There's the right way to take these, very quick iterative baby steps within consumer products. And there's definitely the wrong ways to do it. There's only a couple times. Unfortunately, we talk about these couple instances all the time because we want to share these incredibly heroic, start from nothing and immediate success stories. RX Bar, immediate success story, right? Like there's a couple things about why that brand had the success it did. And we like to talk about this a lot. If you look at their old branding compared to the new branding, branding was a huge part of that. The other thing is they hit two diet trends simultaneously. They hit Whole30, then they hit keto. And they hit both of them, right? So just as Whole30 was going up.
At the right time, right?
Right.
If you can hit that trend curve, if you can hit that timing, you can really change the game. But the thing is, you can't predict timing. It really just has to be like serendipitous, right?
Totally.
It just has to align. And sometimes you got it and sometimes you don't. And when you don't, that's when you got to go through, like you said, just the building blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Building blocks or for those of you who can't see us, I just motioned like me getting punched in the face. So you got to do it. I mean, look, I think it's really cool. One of my really close friends, I won't mention his brand name because it's confidential. They've been doing it just as long as we have. They pivoted away from their hero product and they pivoted into, low sugar or zero sugar snacks. And they have blown the blank up, right? Like I purposely bleep myself, but oh my gosh, right? I'm so happy but let's also talk about Hello. Craig is a really close friend. I think Craig has told the story publicly numerous times. Craig, if you listen to this, 1, hi. 2, I hope you're not upset with me sharing, some of the magic details of what happened with Hello. I had an amazing oral care brand sold for an incredible deal to Colgate, Palmolive, but he was kind of struggling. That brand was not doing great. And it was charcoal. It was the fact that they got in front of that innovation before, Crest or Colgate or Sensodyne or anyone. They were the only charcoal in the market for 18 months in Walmart and Target. And it was the right time, right place. He had a beautiful insight, did the consumer research, understood that this was a trend, and completely capitalized on it. And that then blew up his whole brand in a really incredible way because all these people were like, oh, I'm going to try this new charcoal thing, but I really like the brand and it speaks to me. And then they started moving into other products and into the portfolio. And it's a super interesting mix of timing, luck, grit, having, the right product and the right portfolio. And I think the right mindset.
That's so good. So final question. And I like to ask this because I feel like I learn new things every time. We know that many startups are strapped for cash. So do you have any free or low cost resources that you use or that you recommend, that you leverage for other early stage or brands that are still building?
First off, I want to stop and give a huge shout out to the Emerson Group. Monique, you've been absolutely amazing. You've been a phenomenal thought partner in terms of how we could break into new retailers and just the whole Emerson family, from Scott all the way down has been just such a phenomenal catalyst to see our mission and our brand and our products grow at an exponential rate. So anyone here in the Emerson family listening to this, know from the bottom of our hearts, we are just so incredibly grateful for this partnership. We love working with you guys. And thank you, most importantly.
Thank you for saying that. We love you guys too.
There's a big asterisk, which is thanks for putting up with me. That's I'm hype man extra plus. I get it. And also, as your listeners probably have figured out, I'm not short on words. So the best way to get funding, and as cliche as this, quote is if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you might get money. Start reaching out to people. Reach out to me. My email is, yes, I'm going to give people my email. It's fine. Please don't abuse it. It's just Dave, D-A-V-E, at soapboxsoaps.com. So SOAPBOX, SOAPS.com. And be like, hey, I was listening to Beauty from the Shelf. I'm starting this company, or, I'm $1 million in revenue and I want to grow, and these are the challenges I'm facing with. I learn just as much as you do from each and every one of these times I connect. I obviously, we own and operate 4 brands, so I can't meet for lunch, but I can have a 5-minute call when I'm coming back from the gym or whatever. And I think ultimately it is, you reach out to other entrepreneurs. One of the things I figured out in the years that I've been doing this is entrepreneurs are usually incredibly helpful because they have received tons of help along their journey. I'm not making this up, Monique, there are not hundreds, there are thousands, maybe even now tens of thousands of people who have helped us out figure and maneuver all the complexities that come with building a plane while in flight. So I want to pay it forward. And then also in the process of paying it forward, I find that I learn so much more about our industry and can help out. But the other thing I would say is that angel investors are making a bet on the jockey. When they're writing that check, and I also have been privileged enough to make 12 investments myself, super small checks. No one get too excited if you're listening to this. I cannot emphasize. I am broke. There has been no headline acquisition number for Soapbox or impact-driven brands. So do not expect I'm going to lead you around unless you take Monopoly money, because then hit me up. So, but honestly, angel investing is about the jockey. It's about, does this team have the grit? Does this team have an idea that is interesting enough that I believe that they're going to be able to go out and execute? But one company that I've been an advisor to for the past 6 years had phenomenal growth when money was free, when interest rates were zero, essentially. And they got caught up in the whole iOS 14. If you're not familiar with this, it's basically Tim Cook was like, no, Zuckerberg, you can't, steal all my data from people who are on iOS 14. Therefore, we're going to make this more difficult for you to retarget and show ads on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And a lot of companies that had amazing CPAs or cost per acquisition on, driving D2C companies found themselves in a really, really bad spot. And this was one of those companies that was just losing money hand over fist. I got an email basically a couple of days ago where this guy should have probably given up. And he refuses to give up because he's built a brand that has sold, millions of products to people all over the country. And he knows the value of the brand that he's built. And he's completely retrenching and pivoting. And I want to be in his corner so badly because he's just refusing to throw in the towel. And I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, that's what it's about. It's, like I said before, there are times where opportunity cost, as well as just being a good shepherd, it's the right thing to move on. But I think this guy knows what he has within him. And I think he also knows the opportunity at hand. And I think he could pull this off. And I tell that story because angel investing in your first money is really just about finding people who believe in you and they're willing to put their credit on the line, their social credit, to bring other investors in. In terms of, other more interesting ways, I think crowdfunding, if it's really novel, you get, customers basically to pay for your development. One of the hard parts about running any type of consumable is that there's just inventory and you have to make the right bets on inventory and it needs to move fast enough. But given that interest rates are higher, there's a lot of debt players that have come into the market. So it's another thing where I know we're coming up on time, but if you're interested in learning more, shoot me a note. There's a ton of debt players that weren't here 2 years ago that want to finance your, not necessarily just receivables, but also are looking at what's the value of your inventory. So it becomes a lot more flexible and turning more into a term note instead of something that's more like a revolver. That could be a whole podcast unto itself of what is it to raise in this environment and what are the different milestones to then go from family and friends to seed to Series A to B and so on and so forth. But I am just so honored to be here. Thanks for making me laugh.
Thank you to David for joining me on the podcast today. I certainly laughed a lot. I just mute myself to keep the conversation flowing. There are so many great tips and advice offered in this episode, and listeners even received their first discount code. I'm so excited. I hope that you appreciated David's candid thoughts about building his own brand. I know I certainly did. Please share this with a colleague, leave a review, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.